A PKI is made up of a number of components. But essentially in the real world, a PKI consists of around 80% policy and around 20% technology, really. A real PKI has policies, procedures, installation processes that almost exist, almost need to be followed to prove to auditors and security teams that it's being built and is operated correctly. But from a technology standpoint, you've a number of essential components. So firstly, you have hardware security modules. These can be installed physically inside of a server. They're a USB device or a PCI device, or to service multiple components, these can be installed in a rack. Think of them a little like an appliance. But essentially, they are certified and provide the ability for applications to generate keys and certificates that are needed as part of the PKI solution. You have a certification authority component. This uses the hardware security module. It will generate its own set of keys for certifying other keys and certificates. And think of a certification authority a bit like passport production. You provide the passport authority with your personal information, and they create you your travel document, and that's used to prove your identity when crossing borders. Very similar to an authentication certificate that a CA creates for you to prove your identity in the electronic world. So it's a very important component. It's there to certify the creation of credentials that are used within the ecosystem. And then similarly to the passport analogy, you have a registration authority. And this is a tool that collects information about devices, people, applications that are enrolling. Again, very, very similar to our passport analogy. It collects the information, it enables processes to take place to verify the information that's being provided is correct, and then it passes it to the certification authority for the credential to be created. So, this registration authority is very similar to working with, the certification authority for passport production. Collect information, analyze it, verify, and then create the credential. And then once the credential has been created, you have certificate validation services. And these are effectively certificate revocation lists or online services to enable business applications to check that your certificate is still valid and can be trusted. If you have a certificate that an administrator needs to terminate to advertise to the world it's no longer trusted, its serial number is placed on a revocation list, and when an application processes your certificate, it will grab the certificate revocation list, analyze the list, and if it sees the serial number for your certificate, it will deem it as no longer being trusted. And certificate revocation lists and OCSP servers provide different ways of advertising that revocation status. And again, very, very similar to our passport. We've all got a passport with a unique number inside, a unique serial number, and that too gets placed on a lost and stolen and travel documents list. So the whole process of you requesting a certificate, being issued one, and using it in the real world is very, very similar to our very familiar passport. So you if you're having trouble with any of the technology components, just kind of go back to the passport analogy, because that's really what we're talking about. It's a physical document that proves our identity in different settings. A digital certificate is no different. And then a technology provider can offer other services that a trust service provider may wish to use. Things like remote digital signatures, digital signature services, signature verification, archival, the list goes on. So there are a number of reasons why you may consider migrating a PKI. Migrating a PKI is no different really in your decision-making process in migrating away from any other technology. People migrate away from different technology providers all the time. So the questions around why you should migrate are very, very similar. There are, I guess, some security nuances that are specific to security solutions. But, the obvious ones are that there may be a situation where the relationship between you and your current vendor has changed. There could be a reason the relationship is no longer working. They may be going in a particular strategic direction that no longer aligns with you as a business. There may have been some kind of acquisition, a complete change in direction, which means that the product is no longer being shaped in a way that's going to be useful for your use cases. There may be technical items and features that you need in the product that the vendor has no interest in building, and that you could maybe get those from another vendor. So clearly a compelling reason there would be helpful to migrate, because the product is no longer being developed in line again with your technical strategy. The vendor may have set the product to end of life. People do end of life products if they're no longer investing or they're no longer seeing a return on their investment. So it stands to reason that they would end of life the product and not offer an alternative. So you may have no choice but to migrate. Again, similarly, the vendor might be going out of business. Unfortunately, these things do happen. So there's only so much a vendor can do to support products, but ultimately, if it's having to close down, then it stands to reason that you've a limited amount of time before that product becomes no longer useful to you. And then finally, you may have built a solution based on open source. There are plenty of tools that are offered in the open source market that internal developers can use to build ways to issue keys and certificates and manage them. But there comes a tipping point where your staff may leave, or you've reached this point in growth where you need a commercial off-the-shelf product to service your needs. And so that's kind of one of the final reasons I can think of to provide a migration, or to choose to migrate. Effective migration and migration strategies vary, and this will vary depending on the type of business you operate and how you want to approach migration. So you could create new root and new issuing CAs and start again, or you can migrate existing key material. They both have pros and they both have cons. So in the build new approach, you're going to consider leaving your existing trust infrastructure as it is, but establish new policies, procedures, and installation processes. Buy new equipment, install everything under the watchful eyes of an auditor, your security team, and applications, people, and devices can request new certificates and migrate in a controlled manner as their old certificates expire. So this kind of gives you the ability to run your existing infrastructure as is, no interruption to service, and then take your time to build new to best practice and migrate in a controlled manner. So that's kind of definitely one approach that I've seen lots of people taking. These infrastructures can be built and exist for long periods of time, and what you did 5 years ago might not be what you want to do today. So that's a good strategy for migrating. Alternatively, you may be happy with the way your PKI was built. You've got all of the policies and procedures, it's been running very nicely. You have a very large distributed environment, which means it's going to be difficult to reach all of the endpoints, to install new trust anchors, to make sure your keys and certificates are trusted. So you might want to preserve the existing key material, the existing certificates for the entire PKI. So in this instance, all you'd be doing is swapping out the underlying technology, the product that's used as your certification authority, your registration authority, and keep all of the existing key materials. Another approach along the similar vein is to keep the existing root CA. That's your ultimate trust anchor, and that certificate is the one thing that you have to get onto every single endpoint, into every single device, to make sure that the rest of the certificates are trusted. So you might choose to keep that component on whatever technology you may be running it on, and then build a new issuing CA beneath it, which becomes part of the trust chain. So this helps minimize the amount of interruption for your environment. You don't need to create a new root CA and distribute it everywhere, but you can introduce a new vendor, a new technology to be your issuing CA, the workhorse, the engine. But ultimately, there's no right or wrong approach. This depends entirely on you and your organization. If you've thousands of endpoints, external trust relationships, it may be easier for you to migrate the existing keys to a new technology platform. But I've seen some organizations take this as an opportunity to build new from best practice. As I say, the decisions they made 5-10 years ago when they built the CAs and their infrastructure might be completely different to how they wish to operate today, and in which case that's a good, compelling reason to build new. But there is no right or wrong way. It just depends upon the challenges that you might face when you kind of look at how you would go about migrating, the endpoints that you need to touch, etc. So migrating any technology will definitely prove a set of challenges and hurdles that you're going to have to consider in order to overcome them for a successful migration. So there's a few that I can think of initially that, right off the bat, you need to be talking to technology vendors about. And they may not necessarily be a migration problem with the CA vendor themselves. So remember that CAs use hardware security modules to generate their keys and certificates. And the way hardware security modules are designed, you can't export the key material. They're purpose built for the keys to be generated and stored for all eternity within the HSM. If you try and open them, they self-erase. And there are FIPS certified and common criteria certified products that mean those keys cannot be exported. So you are stuck with them. So the challenges that you kind of run into here are when your existing vendor that you've built your PKI upon creates the keys and certificates in the HSM in a particular way. So the HSM vendor might not necessarily provide tooling to enable you to manipulate some of the attributes and the contents of the HSM. So you might have a use case where vendor A, you started with 10 years ago, it uses the HSM to generate its private key that it's going to use to sign everything in the HSM, and it sets all the attributes it needs, and then it uses it, and your CA is operational. And you come to deal with migration, and the new vendor you've selected actually requires a number of the attributes on the key in the HSM to be set in a particular way. The new vendor might require that the CA's public and private key is in the HSM, which wouldn't have been there generated by your previous vendor. So the technology restriction here comes down to what tooling does the HSM vendor provide you that enables you in a safe, secure and controlled way to manipulate PKCS11 key attributes to be able to import the CA's public key and certificate into the HSM and to perhaps set access control lists on the keys that the keys that it's storing in the HSM. And these are going to vary. There's several main HSM vendors out there that provide different levels of tooling for you to be able to configure the HSM, list what's inside, and perhaps edit some of these all-important P11 attributes that I've been talking about. With any PKI migration, this is going to be the same. The HSM is where the crown jewels are stored. It's where the CAs generate and store, or any application generates and stores its private key. So if you're changing software vendor, there may be certain requirements that you may need, and therefore having the right tools from the vendor that you got the HSM from is super critically important. Again, along the same lines as the key materials and the HSM, if you've installed a PKI 5-6 years ago, there's a possibility that the HSM might be of a certain age where the new vendor you're swapping out from hasn't tested or there isn't good support. So you may be in a situation where you're going to have to go through upgrades on the HSM hardware in order to get to a position where the new vendor, the brand new tool that you're going to be implementing can support the HSM product. So you're definitely looking at compatibility related issues on that one. And then finally, when generating a new root CA, you've taken the decision that you're not going to migrate key materials, so there may be a HSM compatibility problem, or you've taken the decision to build new because policies and procedures are different now versus 5-6 years ago. When you generate a new trust anchor, a new root CA, in order for your end user or end entity keys and certificates to be trusted, that new root CA certificate needs to be installed on each and every endpoint that you're going to have in your infrastructure, or that needs to verify a signature or verify an identity. So if you've got a vast sprawling infrastructure, you've got relationships with external third parties, that trust anchor needs to be installed on each and every endpoint. And that can take time. We see centralized tools that enable you to distribute certificates using Microsoft Active Directory, using group policy. But not everybody's estate is entirely Microsoft. So you've got to build plans and allow time for these certificates to be installed on all of your Mac endpoints, your Linux endpoints, Solaris, whatever is in your estate. That certificate needs to be out there so that your end user certificates, your application certificates from your brand new shiny PKI will be trusted. There's a few technology restrictions, but largely PKI migrations can be and are successful. The main challenges are definitely around if you wish to reuse or preserve your existing trust infrastructure, your existing keys and certificates, because then you're into making sure that there are good levels of compatibility between the old and the new vendor when it comes to the HSM, and that you can touch and edit the attributes that are inside the HSM that the new vendor may need. So here at Ascertia, we have our ADSS server, which is a modular trust services platform that has all of the features you need to build a complete PKI. It's common criteria certified using the latest protection profile for a certification authority. And this means that we've built the tool to be able to offer certification services. This also means that the product's been independently evaluated and tested by a laboratory and then certified by the certifying authority to state that it meets the requirements and security requirements laid out by this protection profile, meaning it's a purpose-built CA that operates as the profile defines. ADSS server enables you to build brand new root and issuing CAs. You can build as many as you want or as many as your license allows, all off of the same installation of the software, which means it's super cost effective. You can also build OCSP services, registration services using our other products to meet all of your trust service requirements. So lots and lots of flexibility there. The product's also been purpose built with tools in mind to help with the migration scenario. So you might have an existing set of keys, certificates and CAs where you want to use and preserve your existing trust infrastructure. So ADSS server will let you connect to a hardware security module. It will let you import the existing keys so that we can bring in the CA certificate, CRLs, end entity certificates, and begin issuing new certificates as if we're the old technology provider. So for the outside world, the relying parties, anything that's going to be trusting a certificate for an authentication use case, trusting a signature originating from one of your certificates, absolutely nothing has changed. So this makes the migration scenario for your users, for your technology, super efficient. To the outside world, nothing has changed. But for you operationally, you've gone through the process of analyzing the HSM, analyzing your issuance processes, and then importing everything into ADSS server, deploying ADSS WebRA server, and then building the ability to issue new keys and certificates to support new users that are being onboarded, but also to continue producing the certificate revocation list to prove to the rest of the world, or the rest of your infrastructure, I should say, that existing keys and certificates that have already been produced do remain and are indeed still trusted.